Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take that in your right hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
The evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth. Thank you very much.
Please take a seat. Thank you. Ms Townsend.
Chair will be starting this afternoon's evidence with the evidence of Mr David Webb.
Thank you.
Mr Webb, please could you give your full name for the inquiry?
David Andrew Webb.
And is it correct that you have provided the inquiry with two witness statements, the first dated the 2nd of February and the second dated the 12th of February of this year? Chair, may those two witness statements be adduced into the inquiry. Their reference numbers are INQ 000114 and INQ 000131.
Thank you indeed.
I'm grateful. Mr Webb, I'm going to start by asking about your roles at Brookhouse during the relevant period. It's correct that you started at Brookhouse in 2014 at G4S?
Yes. Yes.
And you started there as a DCO,
yeah.
a detention custody officer.
Yeah.
You ended your employment with G4S in March 2018.
Yes.
Mr Webb, what did you do for a living before you were a DCO at Brookhouse?
I'm an engineer.
What type of engineer?
Commercial vehicle.
And may I ask what you're doing now for a living?
I'm a commercial engineer.
The same thing?
Yeah.
You also qualified as a use of force instructor during your time at Brookhouse, and that was in August 2017, so just at the end of the relevant period that this inquiry is looking at.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you about that later. Firstly, what was the role of detention centre officer?
Our basic role was the safe running of the centre and obviously looking after the detainees, meeting. Then, in my case, I worked in E-wing, so meeting their needs.
So you said that you worked in E-wing. Did you work in E-wing the whole time that you were employed for the whole 4 years?
Yes. Yeah.
And how many staff, members of staff, would normally be on E-wing at a time?
Normally two members of staff, possibly more, if you know. Because we'd have ACDTs and things like that going on in the wing, so there'd be more staff presence.
And how many residents, how many detained persons were held on E-wing at a time?
It varied, obviously, from day to day, but there were only 13 rooms. They were generally single occupancy. And then we had the care and separation unit, which was sort of almost like a separate room behind that, which had 5 rooms.
So that was it was separate.
It was a separate room, so that would have been staffed by. And normally you'd have an extra member of staff down there if there was anybody in there, because it wasn't necessarily always somebody in there.
And in terms of the residents on E-wing, were many of them or most of them on constant supervision?
No, they weren't mostly on conferences. They could be down there for all sorts of reasons. Vulnerabilities, whether that be medical, it varied.
When detained persons were on constant watch, what did that exactly mean? Could you explain to us what constant watch meant?
On E-wing we had 2 constant washrooms. Can't remember the numbers. I think it was 7 and 8 rooms, the numbers. And they actually had like a removable panel at the front, so you had a good view in. So it was literally, if it was constant supervision, there would be someone with that detainee literally 24 hours a day. If they left the wing to go and do something or visit, someone would escort them. There was literally an officer with them all the time.
And is that a role that you undertook often?
Yes, but you wouldn't take it for your whole shift. It was done on a rotational system.
You say in your witness statement, your first witness statement, paragraph 85, no need to look at it now, you say in terms of improvements, what you would suggest is there was an increase of staff numbers and that this would have the biggest impact on detained persons' welfare, staff health, safety and welfare. Do you think there was enough staff in E-Wing specifically?
E-Wing wasn't so bad because we were a very small unit with only 13 rooms. That was more of a generalisation about the whole centre, whereas on the other wings, you obviously had 3, 4, I wouldn't know the exact numbers, obviously depending on who was on shift, maybe 3 or 4 members of staff, to a wing with obviously a higher population.
So even when there were many detained persons who were on constant watch, which, as you've explained to us, required constantly watching somebody for...
They, in all honesty, to be fair, they would generally be brought to E-Wing, the constant washes. We had 2 specialist rooms. If we had to adapt and use another room with the door open, we would do whatever, but there would have to be someone there. But it was easier to do a constant watch, in honesty, on E-Wing, because it was a smaller, sort of almost like a enclosed environment. It was shut off from the rest of the centre. They had their own courtyard, etc., etc.
So you're saying that there were enough staff even when there were 2 or more?
Yeah,
people-
they would apply more staff to obviously suit the situation.
So when you were referring to the only improvement that you've suggested in your witness statement, which is an increase in staff numbers, you weren't referring to E-Wing?
I was referring to the centre as a general. We weren't so bad, as say, on E-Wing because we were a smaller unit. But obviously, when you had, a unit with 4 or 5 times maybe the amount of people on it, and not 4 or 5 times the amount of staff, obviously that would become more increasingly difficult.
Part of your job on E-Wing was to care for detained persons who were on Acdt, assessment, care and detention,
Yeah.
and teamwork.
Yeah.
And you've said in your witness statement, your first statement, paragraph 67, that your understanding of Acdt was that if a person self-harmed or suggested they wished to, an Acdt would be opened, an individual manager would be spoken to, and observations would be planned, and they would be monitored by staff in line with the Acdt process.
Yeah.
So what were Acdt observations? Can you explain what that is?
They would be different for different detainees depending on what their situation was. They would have been obviously assessed. That wouldn't have been by me. That would have been by a senior management team and some assessors, and then they would stipulate what level of observations they need. For example, one person might need 1 observation an hour, another one may be 4 observations per hour. But it was reviewed regularly, obviously with the detainee present, and then that obviously may fluctuate depending on the circumstances changing.
And just to be clear, this was for detained persons who were at risk of self-harm or who had already self-harmed?
Yeah, or at risk of self-harming, yes. Yeah.
You said that the Acdt process was effective in monitoring their welfare. What do you mean by welfare?
But it was said that if they were on observations, obviously if they were on open wing and they weren't on any sort of observations at all, they could have obviously had basically the run of the centre, where we were doing observations hourly or 4 times an hour or whatever, depending on their situation. And obviously it was easier to monitor how they were doing. Because obviously we wouldn't just make an observation, we would still obviously talk to the detainees. If it was 4 observations an hour, you may have a half-hour conversation with that detainee in that time.
And what mental health concerns did you feel able to monitor through this process?
If we had any of the mental health issues were obviously led by healthcare. If we had any concerns or thought there was anything, I would immediately get onto healthcare, and then, to be fair, they were very good, and they would come down and speak to the detainee.
What types of mental health illnesses did detained persons have?
We had people with sort of ADHD to, excuse me, to, can't remember specific cases, obviously it's over 4 years ago. I do remember we had one chap who had bipolar, but obviously that was medications that they were given and certain things. It was about making sure they got their medications as well, because we would know that from the Acdt.
And do you remember anybody who had PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder?
No, I don't, to be honest with you. But say so, but I'm not saying it couldn't have happened. It's too long ago for me to remember. Individual cases.
Did you know any detained persons at all that had post-traumatic stress disorder?
Not that I know of.
What was the input of healthcare? You mentioned healthcare and said they were very good. What was their input into the observations?
Again, I can
and
only speak
ACTT
about
reviews?
E-wing, because obviously E-wing, they would come and give the medication to the detainees on E-wing. They would come down every morning and they would do that. They would write in their observation book when they came down, or if they spoke to them or whatever. And obviously if we had any concerns, we would call them, and generally they would come down as soon as practicable, and then they would speak to them, and they would then enter that again into their ACDT if that particular detainee was on ACDT.
You say in your first witness statement, paragraph 15, that E-wing was a safe environment to care for vulnerable detainees. Is that right?
It was a safer environment than the other wings, because obviously it was on one level. It wasn't split over levels. The ratio of obviously staff to detainees was higher, so it was easier to monitor.
You also describe it as a quieter atmosphere.
Yeah, it was compared to the other wings, which were obviously, say, 3 levels in excess of 100 people, obviously could be quite noisy places, whereas E-wing, because it was, you know, sort of maximum, normally, excuse me, a normally maximum of 13, it was a much quieter sort of, yeah, it just wasn't as noisy. There just wasn't as much noise.
Ask the evidence handler, please, to bring up INQ 000101. It's the tab 10, Chair.
Thank you. You have a copy of this if you would like to refer to it, but it will come up on the screen later.
It will do, thank you. And it's page 14 to 15. This is the evidence of Owen Sirod, who was also a DCO at the time. Did you know Owen Sirod?
I had met Owen Sirod, obviously through Waltham Centre, but I'd never worked with Owen Sirod, so I know of him.
Just to the top of the page, so that you can see page 53. These are questions that I asked Mr. Sirod in his evidence. Mm-hmm. I've said at line 9, which is just towards the top of the page, you mentioned the noise of a detainee was banging on the door or making noise in the cell. Was that noise obvious if you were standing in a cell in E-wing? The answer was yes, because you could hear it in B-wing as well. B-wing is above. Question, so you could hear it 1 floor up? Yes, detainees on B-wing used to complain about the banging they could hear from E-wing and Rule 42. Do you recognise that at all?
If that was someone on Rule 40, Rule 42, they would have been on CSU, in the separate block in CSU, not in E-wing, because that's where those rooms were. As with every one of the wings, at night sometimes there would be noise. I'm not saying it was a dead quiet place, because it wasn't. People did bang, people did make noise.
So if you were...
But as to whether you could hear it on B-wing, I wouldn't be able to comment on that, because I've never worked on B-wing.
Appreciate that, Mr. Webb, but you did work in E-wing.
Yeah.
So you said that if people were banging who were on Rule 40, 42 from CSU, you would be able to hear that, wouldn't you, in E-wing, because you had to go through E-wing in order to get to CSU?
Yeah, it's a closed door. You would hear it, but it wouldn't be... I wouldn't have said it was an excessive noise. You would hear banging, and you would hear noise from there. But in my experience, it wasn't continuous, and it wasn't often. And normally there would be an officer that would go to obviously see what was going on. So it would normally try and be resolved.
So you don't recognise Mr. Sirod's views on E-wing there? Or
Not of it being an over excessive noise, no more than compared to any of the other wings.
And was it right that often detained persons would be sent to E-wing or CSU before they were going on their flight to be removed?
It was something that was not when I first started there, but towards my end at one point. They did for some of the ones where they were being removed sort of through the night, or because obviously it disrupted the centre less. It's only my view. I have no idea why they did, but my view would have been they would have done it because it was less disruptive to the whole of the centre, because we were more of an enclosed unit.
And
You
you
were
say-
disrupting less people.
I see. And you say disruptive. Why would it be disruptive to remove detained persons?
If a detained person was not, and it was removal directions, and obviously they did have to go. If there was any need to do use of force, for example, for the rest of it, if it was depending on time, if it was during the day, it would possibly mean locking down a whole wing, which obviously on the other wings would have been 100+ people, whereas on E-wing it would be a maximum of 13, so just for lesser disruption of the whole regime, the whole centre.
And that disruption sometimes ended in or use of force incidences.
It could, yeah.
And so were there many use of force instances on E-wing?
No, not on E-wing itself. No, I wouldn't say excessive. No.
That wasn't my question.
Oh, sorry.
Excessive. Were there many?
No, I don't think there was. I wouldn't say there was many. A lot of the time, the people would come down. They'd go there. They knew they were flying. Some of them were quite happy to fly, and then they would just leave early hours of the morning, and obviously it would not be a problem.
So you don't recognise Mr. Syred's picture, which he paints at page 54, just further down. Just scroll down, please. Right at the top. It's a very echoey environment, so it would be obviously in Rule 42, the air conditioning used to howl, it was cold. There was an end room in Rule 42, it was cold because at the corner of buildings, the wind used to howl through there, so it was quite a stark environment for somebody to be in. I accept that that's in relation to CSU, but
Yes.
you didn't hear those echoing, banging, also in E-wing.
No, you may hear a muffled noise from there if they were banging, but I wouldn't say it was a loud. It obviously wasn't. It was like being no different than being at home with somebody next door. It wouldn't be, I would say, excessively loud.
Mentioned earlier that E-wing was used to accommodate those on constant supervision. And were there also detained persons who were removed from association on Rule 1442?
There were people but they would have been in the CSU section, not the E-wing.
And were there any occasions when those detained persons who were on Rule 1442 were in fact in E-wing because the CSU was full?
I can't remember any, to be honest with you. Not that we spilled over. No.
How would you be informed about whether a detained person on E-wing was mentally ill?
Normally through induction process or from health officers. When they came in, I believe they were obviously seen in reception. I believe healthcare saw them there. I've never worked reception, so I don't know the process, but I understand they were assessed when they came in from healthcare, etc. And then generally, if that was the case, we would know when they came down to us.
You mentioned that there were some detained persons who were disruptive. Why do you think that they were disruptive? Did it have anything to do with their mental illness, for example?
Some of them were disruptive. I wouldn't have said through their mental illness. So obviously I'm not very medical, so I wouldn't know whether someone who was being disruptive necessarily had a mental health issue or not.
So it was difficult to tell the difference then between
for
somebody...
For me personally, unless we actually knew due to an ACDT or obviously healthcare information. I'm no medical expert, is the honest answer.
And did you get any training on how to spot somebody who was mentally ill, displaying any problems with their mental health?
No.
None at all in the introductory course?
It was obviously, we were told there might be people, but as far as I was aware, that would be obviously healthcare that would obviously do diagnosis, for example, or if they need to be on whatever medication, or obviously that was not as I say, I'm no expert.
You said that you're no expert. Does that mean that you felt well equipped or not well equipped to deal with people who are mentally ill in your care and E-wing?
I think we could have done better. We asked to get some training, and there was talk of it. It never happened. But there was talk of us going on to do some sort of formal training. But in my time that I was there, it may have changed. It's 4 years ago. But
So does that mean that you did feel well equipped or you did not feel well equipped to deal with persons with mental illness?
the medical side, I would say no, because I don't know enough about the illnesses. But the dealing with people, it was just, in honesty, most of the time it was just talking to them and trying to get a rapport with them, which was easy on E-wing because it was a smaller unit.
Is it possible to distinguish between what you've said on the medical side of things and then how you dealt with a person through Acdt and in person?
Well, if they was on ACDC, I would say they would be on increased observations anyway, because it would highlight to us that obviously, whether it be that it was a self-harm issue or a medical issue, we would observe them more anyway.
What do you mean by whether it was a self-harm or medical issue? Why are you putting those in different baskets there?
Well, I don't put anybody into. Some people do have mental issues. I have that. Other people maybe for other reasons. It's I say I'm no expert. I don't know why people feel the way they do, and the only way to find out a bit about the person is conversation, which is what we obviously tried to do at E-wing, because it was a small unit. We tried to engage a bit more, and then perhaps help them with other interests that they have, to try and sort of take up their time and sort of assist them if there was something in particular that they wanted to do that they find calming or whatever the case may be. We would try and assist where we could.
So you said that staff were caring and understanding. You say this in your first witness statement, paragraph 9. Would you say that you got on well with your colleagues in E-wing?
In E-wing, yeah. As I say, I only ever worked on E-wing, so I worked with a very small number of staff in relation to some of the others that were sent around the centre.
And were they usually the same people that you worked with?
Yes, yeah, but it was pretty much. There was sort of 3 or 4, but obviously due to shift patterns, it would rotate, but we would generally work as a group.
And who were they? Who were those other DCOs? That you used to
When
work
I was there, mainly it was Andy Jennings. I can't remember her name now. It's really bad. Tom. Just remember Tom. Sorry, the name's elude me. It was a long time ago. I can't think of his name.
And would you say that you had a close relationship with those colleagues on E-wing?
I'd say we had a good working relationship. I wouldn't say I was close. We didn't really sort of socialise or anything else. Obviously, I lived a long way from a lot of the people that lived there. Were obviously very local. I was 50 miles away. So.
You said that in your first witness statement, paragraph 7, that there was a culture of trust, flexibility and teamwork. What do you mean by that?
Well, we all work together, obviously with detainees, sharing information if you found out something that might be helpful. I can't remember the detainee's name, but I know going back, obviously it's quite a few years now, we had one detainee that found that making models, for example, was very calming. So we used to go and try and get him, see the teacher and get him stuff so that he could sit in his room and do that if he was feeling a bit anxious.
Well, I'm not talking more about the care that you gave to detained persons. I'm talking more about your relationship with other staff. So unless I've misunderstood your evidence in your witness statement, you were talking about the culture of trust, flexibility and teamwork. I presume you meant teamwork within the staff.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, during the day, yeah. I mean, the general running of the wing, we would work together. Obviously, there were if there were people in CSU, then they obviously needed to be to be fed, etc., etc., and we would all work together and get things done. It was never a one-sided, one person was doing everything. Everybody just basically got on with the job.
So you work collaboratively, you work
Yes,
together?
yeah.
And you say also in paragraph 42 of that statement that you relied on your colleagues. Why was it important that you were able to rely on your colleagues, particularly in E-Wing?
But information of what's gone on, we used to do obviously a handover at the end of every shift, because we would, obviously you'd have a day and a night, and then when they come in they would pass anything that had gone on through the day. They'd made notes of it in the diary if there was anything significant or things that were going to be happening. Just generally working together to try and make it as easy as possible, really.
And what would happen if you had a problem or fallen out with one of those colleagues, do you think?
Be honest with you, it never happened. So, I never fell out with any of them. So I never saw it as a problem.
Was it a particular issue because of use of force instances? So you have been involved in many use of force incidents over the relevant period. Is that right?
Yeah, quite a few.
And presumably it was important that you worked as a team.
Yes, yeah.
And it was important that you worked together during those use of force instances, and you could rely on your other detention centre, your colleagues.
Oh, yeah.
So it's right to say these relationships were important to you.
Yeah, as they are to everybody. Yeah, we all had to work together, especially if there was something like a planned intervention or a spontaneous incident. Then yes, we did. Yeah.
And so this must have cultivated a sense of loyalty amongst this small group of people.
Yeah, well, we all worked closely together. As I say, that was it. It was working closely together as opposed to a social thing. It was definitely a good working relationship.
And you've said you relied on each other.
Yeah, as all members of staff, and I'm sure they do on all of the other wings as well. It wouldn't have been just relevant to E-Wing. All staff would rely on each other, because if you were use of force, for example, was part of the job, and if you were asked to go and do a use of force, hopefully you end up in use of force, but if it did, then you would obviously expect to rely on the people you are to do their part of it too, obviously for the detainee and for yourselves.
But that must have been particularly the case in E-Wing, where there was a small number of staff.
Yeah, but small number of staff, but as with all the other wings, there was, we had radios, we would push a button if there was an incident, and we would hope that there would be a response team to come and help.
Sure, but you were used to working with the same people every day, or roughly the same 3 or 4 people every day.
Roughly, yeah.
And so when you were speaking to the detention centre officers on your own, that would have been a safe place for you to be able to talk.
Away from detainees and everybody else, yeah, I would, yes, definitely.
And would that safe place include being able to sound off about detainees?
I would say it was fair to say there would be a certain amount of locker room talk around the whole building, not just in it, obviously through E-Wing. Yeah, let off a bit of steam, maybe, yeah.
And you knew, because you had these close working relationships, that kind of locker room talk was unlikely to be reported or challenged?
No, I wouldn't have said anybody said anything that was reportable. If it was that it needed to be reported, so I would say, to be fair, the people I worked with would most probably, they would have challenged it anyway, at the very least.
So you never heard anything the whole time that you were at Brookhouse that led you to think about reporting what they'd said?
No, I don't think I've ever reported anything. I think the only thing, I've reported other incidents, but I don't think I've reported on anything that I've heard from a staff member that was needed challenging.
You said you reported other incidents. What incidents are you talking about?
No, if there was any security incidents, whatever, we would fill in instant reports. They would be filled out as usual, but I don't think I've ever filled out one of those on a member of staff, I don't believe, or none that I can remember.
So you didn't report any instances of locker room, as you describe it, locker room talk to further up the chain?
No.
I don't need to bring this up, but we have an expert, Professor Bosworth, who has given her expert opinion in relation to what she's seen at Brookhouse. And she said that some of the most troubling footage screened in Panorama was recorded in an E-wing. That's paragraph 4.12 of her report. Have you seen Panorama?
I saw it after it aired, to be fair.
Have you seen it once or more than once?
Only once.
And do you accept that a lot of what you saw was recorded on E-wing?
Yes, yeah. There were a couple of instances reported on E-wing. There were obviously other wings involved as well.
How does this then square with your... Just need to wave around a minute.
Sorry about that.
So, and do you accept that what you what we witnessed on Panorama, which was on E-wing, as you say, amounted to abuse of detainees, whether verbal or physical?
I mean, obviously I wasn't on shift or even in the building when it happened, so it's difficult to me without seeing, because obviously I understand that that's an edited version of what happened. But from what I saw, no, it wasn't acceptable. But I don't know the whole...
My question wasn't was it acceptable. My question was, do you agree that the Panorama programme showed that detainees were abused on E-wing, physically and verbally?
The only one I can remember on E-wing was the one...
527. I'm afraid you haven't got it in front of you.
No, sorry.
But are you talking about the incident with Jan Pascali on the 25th of April?
Yeah, that's the only one that I can remember from E-wing. Most of the others were on the other wings, I believe. But I can't really comment on that because I wasn't there, obviously.
Does this square then with your assertion that attitudes towards detainees were caring and understanding, which you say in your witness statement?
Well, my experience, and I can only speak of my experience, with the staff that I worked with, I've never witnessed any of that, is the honest answer. I've never witnessed anything like that before. Until, until the Panorama programme came out, obviously, and then I saw it. And my initial thought was that it was unacceptable.
But you were on E-wing every day that you were on shift, weren't you?
Every day that I was on shift, but more so through this relevant period, I wasn't on shift that often because most of the time, as I've said, I was on training. I think I spent, I think it was 18 days out of that whole relevant period actually on shift.
But you don't think that unacceptable behaviour was just confined to those 5 months, or do you think that...
I can only say what I've seen, and I hadn't seen that sort of behaviour before. I'd only seen it from what had been disclosed by the Panorama programme.
Given there was a small group of you, do you think that how could you have not, if he says it wasn't you, how could it not have been within your knowledge or awareness that this was happening in E-wing?
So I can only go on what I've seen in the past, and on my shift, that obviously was the opposing shift. I'm not blaming anyone, but that was the opposing shift, and some of those people weren't what were originally E-wing staff. They were from other wings that were obviously, for whatever reason they were there. I wouldn't know because I wasn't obviously on shift that day, but they weren't all E-wing staff. But I can only speak about the E-wing staff I worked with, and I'd never come across that before.
Never anything like anything you saw on Panorama?
No.
Verbal abuse of detainees?
No.
What about the locker room talk that you were alluding to earlier? We heard some of that on Panorama as well. How often would you hear that on E-wing?
You wouldn't hear. You wouldn't hear any. It would be possibly in a staff room. It was. It wouldn't have obviously been in the middle of an open wing. If someone, was upset about one thing in particular, they might shout off a little bit, and then 5 minutes to calm down, and then they return to their whatever they're doing. You know, effects of adrenaline and everything else is quite normal, isn't it?
So it's quite normal. Was it normal to speak about detainees?
Oh no, I
in that way?
mean, if someone has got a grievance, they will speak to other people. That's just, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a valid one or it was against the detainee. There was just we spoke. I'm not saying that every time that we walked out of the room, it was to complain about detainees. It wasn't.
Well, we'll come on to some of that locker room chat that we've witnessed of yours later on this afternoon. I want to ask you about senior management. You said that senior management were visible on wings. This is paragraph 11 of your first statement and 39 to 41 of your second. How often would you see senior management come to visit you on E-Wing?
On E-Wing, we would see them at a minimum of once a day, because they would come and sign the diary. That was part of their daily routine. But they would come down if we requested them. They would come down and they would wander around the centre. But there was no set pattern. As you know, they'll be at 1 o'clock, they'll be at 2 o'clock. But they certainly did come to E-Wing.
And if there was a particular incident, a use of force incident or self-harm incident,
They would definitely come down straight away. Yeah.
What was your relationship like with them?
I would say a good working relationship with them. They never, if I rang them and asked them for something or to come and try and help, they always did. I've never had a negative answer from them.
I should clarify, by them, who do you mean? Who were your managers at the time?
Steve Lawton, Ellie Francis before him, Nick London, and there was one more, but I can't remember his name. I'm sorry, that was literally just as I started, but he left just after.
And some of these are DCMs?
They're all DCMs.
They're all DCMs. What about senior management above that?
Senior management used to come to E-Wing again at least once a day, because they would come and check the diary and check the ACDT records daily. If we had an ACDT, they would come down and check it and obviously see the observations that were being done, etc. And they would sign those, they would sign the diary, and they would also come back if there was any reviews of any form to be done to see the detainees. So,
And did you feel like you could speak to DCMs or senior managements if you had an issue?
yeah,
And
I think so, yeah.
provide us with any examples of when that was necessary?
Examples is, of course, such a long time ago. If I felt that an observations was not enough, then I could speak to her, and then during the review they would bring that up, and they may increase them, and then obviously vice versa, they may decrease them if there are any concerns or we thought there weren't enough.
Your evidence that senior managements were visible is in contrast to a lot of other officers that we've heard give evidence who said that they complained that they weren't visible. Do you have any explanation for why you might have seen them more than other people?
Whether it was different on other wings, as I say, because on E-Wing we had the ACDTs, etc. They would come down every day anyway. If we had the Rule 40s or the Rule 42s, they would come down daily to see those. So perhaps that's why I would see them more than others.
In terms of DCMs, you said spoke of DCM Loughton, Nick London. Did they have a particular style of management, would you say?
The managers, I wouldn't say a particular style, no. Just my dealings with them was normally obviously if I'd called them or they'd come to do the thing, so it would generally just be a conversation of, had there been any field refusals or any issues.
Professor Bosworth, in her report, paragraph 6.5, says that on E-Wing there was a gap between senior management team and DCOs, which was filled by a core group of DCMs who favoured, and I quote, an aggressive authoritarian style of management. And she drew that from evidence from a David Waldock. Did you know David Waldock?
No, I don't recall him, no.
And do you recognise what she says about there being an aggressive authoritarian style of management?
I mean, well, the DCMs I dealt with, mainly obviously through the relevant period, etc., was Steve, and I found that he would come down and he would talk to people. Was his first initial thing to do.
Who's he? Sorry,
Steve Loughton and Nick London. To be fair, they were sort of towards the well, definitely towards the relevant period, were the two DCMs then. And on Ewing, they always came down and spoke to the detainees. You know, I wouldn't have said they were aggressive. They tried to help sort out whatever issues they had.
I don't think she was talking about aggressive towards detainees, more in terms of their management style, in terms of how they treated you as DCOs.
I wouldn't have said they were aggressive, no.
I want to move on now to use of force. Firstly, about your own training. You said in your first witness statement that you undertook initial training on use of force at the beginning of your time in at G4S. Was this adequate in your view to prepare you for the many, as you said earlier, use of force incidents which you were involved with?
It gave you an outline of what the job is. Obviously, they tried to cover as much as they can, but you know, the list is exhaustive. I don't think they could have covered everything that can possibly happen. The use of force training I thought was quite good. I say we were spoken to by various other people through the training course, and they sort of explained to us about the security side, and there was scenario training, etc., which was useful, but obviously I wouldn't say it prepared you for everything.
And you later, in August 2017, trained as a use of force instructor.
Yeah.
What was the role of a use of force instructor once trained at Brookhouse?
We did CNR courses, initial training courses as part of the ITC, and staff refreshers, and we did separate courses of personal protection. Excuse me, because not all staff, because of the different sites, were trained in CNR, depending on what they were going on to do.
And was there an assessment or interview to become a use of force trainer?
I had an interview, believe it was with Michelle Brown, but I might be wrong. It was definitely one of the senior management team at the time. And then from there I went on an assessment day, which to Kidlington, because it's not a G4S training course. I did the assessment, I passed the assessment, and then I went back in August for a 2-week or 10-day course at Kidlington.
And what was your motivation to become a use of force trainer in the first place?
It was one of the things that I'd seen advertised, and it was another thing to try and improve my obviously CNR skills, etc., etc. It's just an opportunity that arose.
And did you get paid any more to do it?
No.
You said that you had an interview with Michelle Brown and there was an assessment. Do you know what factors were taken into consideration when giving you the role?
I have no idea. It was.
Were you given any kind of bullet points, what was going to be assessed?
When I went to Kidlington, we had to basically do a present. The initial training there was we had to do a presentation, which we had a choice of, and then we picked one of those and and then obviously went to Kidlington with that, which was our own presentation, which we did. Then once we passed that assessment, then we went, and obviously it was all the course then, basically.
And what would the presentation be on?
I think I did mine on, I think it was law as into the use of the C&R side of it also, like reasonable, necessary, proportionate, etc. I believe.
And you said that you worked with DCO Connolly when training as a use of force instructor. Were you trained by DCO Connolly?
I shadowed pretty much all of the use of force instructors that they had there at the time at some point. So, yeah, John Connolly, Steve Webb, Michael Trott, Dave Killick.
And do you remember what John Connolly's training style was like?
He was very stickler on the, I suppose, on the laws and on the PowerPoint. Not, I don't know really. It's hard to, but he was, yeah, he generally very informative. When we did our, like my initial training, if you wanted to know anything, he would try and help as much as he could.
And you said that you went to Kidlington to do this use of force instructor training.
That's right.
So that was a central location, was it, for all
Yes.
DCOs who wanted to become trainers?
And prison officers, because it's not obviously a G4S course, it's national tactical
So there were
training group.
So there were prison officers also.
Prison officers there as well, yeah.
We heard from Nathan Ward, and he says in his statement, paragraphs 230, 232, we don't need to bring it up, that there was a toxic masculine culture within these training centres, and that trainers demonstrated sexist and macho attitudes and encouraged heavy drinking. Did you experience any of this?
I went on my initial day training with another DCO from here, which was who was a female, and certainly not. And drinking, no, I don't drink anyway, so it certainly wouldn't have been me.
And did you hear trainers using sexist language?
No, we had females with us in the thing.
You say that you completed your assessment day before completing the full use of force instructor training course in August 2017. So you completed the training on the 11th of August 2017. You said prior to this you mainly shadowed existing trainers.
Yes. Yeah.
I just want to bring up on the screen, please, SXP quadruple 057 and page 4. It's tab 10.
Thank you.
Line 16 to 22 says, on the 27th of May, DCO Dave Webb, who also acts as a restraint trainer, brackets, despite not having his final qualifications, while getting kitted up for a planned restraint, instructed an inexperienced member of staff in relation to a shield. We'll go on to that shield incident in a moment. These are essentially a written up version of Callum Tully's diary notes. Mr. Tully says here, despite not having his final qualifications, this was in May, do you agree that you were acting as a restraint trainer at that point in May?
No, because I hadn't gotten qualifications, so I was shadowing other. I was not acting as a trainer, I was shadowing all that time.
And so you didn't show anybody how to use any techniques, use of force techniques?
No, not at that point. That point, I was assisting him. I would, excuse me. I would take part in the training sessions from the point of view that I would lay on the, basically in the scenario side. I would lay on the mat. They would use the techniques on me. I may act as another person in part of a 3-man team, but I wouldn't have been instructing. That would have been the instructors that did that.
Did you take place in any training informally?
No.
You didn't show or tell other officers what to do in terms of use of force?
I, but he, yeah, the only time I have it is with this shield with Callum, but he basically you don't see it quite so much, obviously, through the editing. Was badgering for quite a while, and in the end we answered his questions.
So you did, in fact, tell Mr. Collier how to do some a CNR technique.
He asked how you hold the shield, and I did reply after him asking several times.
And you didn't not only reply, did you? You showed him physically how to do it.
I showed him where to hold it, and I told him that it had to be at 45 degrees, which is now I know definitely is correct. Terminology for the rest definitely wasn't correct as far as the manual is concerned, but then I wasn't an instructor at that point.
Was that an appropriate thing to do, despite the fact that you hadn't received your final qualifications, to be showing other members of staff, inexperienced members of staff, how to use a shield and how to conduct use of force instances?
In hindsight, which is a great thing, no, it wasn't. And in honesty, Callum had obviously had the same training as everybody else, so he really should have been able to answer his own question.
Shall we have a look at this in particular? Can we play, please, Kenkov 1025, VT01 7052 70011, please? Clip 1. Before, just whilst, thank you. If you could play, please, from 135 to 208. Thank you. It's 1 minute 35. Thank you.
So you can sit up. There's not a lot we can do at this moment.
This man needs to be seen.
I'm sorry, this isn't the right clip. It should be Kenkov 1025. V201 7052 70011. Whilst the evidence handler is doing that, this is what we've just been talking about. It's there are comments that were made to Ian Pascali and Callum Tully on the 27th of May, before an incident, a use of force incident, took place with D1914. Perhaps we'll just look at the transcript whilst that is taking place, if that's okay. Tab 11 of the bundle, and it's transcript 87. If that could be brought up on screen, please. And it's pages 16 to 17. Right at the bottom of the page. We can see the second line from the bottom, Ian Pascali, "Oh, relax, man, you'll be fine." You've explained just earlier that this was Callum Tully asking you for advice. Is that right?
If that's the shield incident, then yes.
And you say there, so he says, "Oh, relax, man, you'll be fine." And there's a attributed to you, it says, "If he dies, he dies." The inquiry accepts that wasn't you, or doesn't appear to be you, from
No,
the
it wasn't.
footage.
I did.
Do you know who that might have been?
I've no idea. There were several people in the room, to be honest with you, and I have no idea who it was.
When you heard somebody say that, did you hear somebody say that?
I didn't hear anybody say that. No, I may have be getting changed whatever the case may be. I honestly don't know. I don't remember hearing it, which is why when they said it was me, I said, I know it wasn't me because I didn't even hear it get said.
So do you accept that you later on say it's nothing on us? So if you read over the page, just go on to the next page, please. Top of the page. Somebody says, if he dies, he dies. And then Jan Pascali says, yeah, exactly. Dave Webb, there's nothing on us. Dave Webb, at the end of the day, inaudible, rolling his fucking head, inaudible, with the shield.
It's nothing on us. I don't remember saying that at all. I only know by looking at the footage several times because I was confused about the line 599. It says at the end of the day, that is something I would say. And what I actually said is you need to control his head.
Well, we'll get onto that in a moment. But you were a part of this conversation, weren't you?
Bits of it between getting changed, so yeah.
Well, there's parts before that where you have spoken on page 16, and there's also parts afterwards, and you agree that you were the person that said the end of the day remark.
Yes.
So you were part of the conversation.
Yeah, between doing other things, yes. I think it would have been a general conversation. It wasn't just sort of like a one-to-one conversation. It was a room full of people.
Sure, but so you would have heard, if you were part of that conversation, somebody say, if he dies, he dies.
Honestly, I didn't hear anybody doing that, but I say I may have then been putting some form of kit on or whatever and not paying attention.
Do you agree that that comment is callous?
It is, yeah.
Have you heard that been said before?
No, I do know where it's from, but that's only because I've since looked it up. Because somebody else it wasn't somebody else, sorry, that's the wrong way to put it. I know somebody else had said it, I had heard it before, not like I'd read the script, but I'd heard it somewhere before, and it's from a film.
You say someone else. Sorry, what do you mean? Do you mean?
No, I can, having read this and having seen the programme, I can remember those words, not at that incident, but I remember having heard them before, and I've heard them obviously from a film.
So you're saying that you'd heard those words before in a film? Or
Yes.
You'd heard those words
not on that day,
Brookhouse
not on that day, but after reading it, I knew I'd heard that expression before, and yes, it's from a film.
And you'd heard that expression before at Brookhouse?
No, not at Brookhouse. No. I've since this report came out, and that I knew that I'd heard that somewhere before, not at Brookhouse, but I'd heard that exact saying somewhere before. And
did you know DCO Derek Murphy?
yes, Derek was on the opposite shift to me, but I think he predominantly worked B-Wing, I think. He did work on E-Wing as well, but he predominantly worked on B-Wing, I think.
So he did work on E-Wing, and
Yes.
were you on any shifts together?
We would have crossed over at some point, yeah. But on crossover days. So
Have you heard him giving evidence this week? Have you watched any of the other DCOs?
no,
giving
I haven't
evidence?
watched. Sorry, and unfortunately, my working hours, I don't get the time to do that, so I've not seen any evidence from anybody.
So did you know that he admitted to saying that phrase, if he dies, he dies?
Oh, yeah, possibly. That's possible, but I've not seen it anywhere else.
I want to turn to the words then that were used, lines 599 to 60. So at the end of the day, rolling his fucking head with the shield, so I wouldn't worry about it. What did you mean, rolling his head with the shield?
I said controlling his head. That is a misquote on the transcript. I said controlling his head, which is what the number one officer would do. They would use the shield, and then they would remove the shield, and they would become the head officer controlling the head.
I want to turn to the investigation report into this. So that's CGS 005979, and it's page 8. That's at tab 15, Chair. page 8. This is an allegation that was substantiated following a G4S investigation into exactly this incident. The allegation is, on 27th of May, while getting kitted up for a planned restraint, you instruct an inexperienced member of staff in relation to a shield to hit with the edge anywhere between the knee and the throat, and you just keep fucking going, hit him with a big gun. When asked if he meant the shield, you said yes, you don't stop until he's going nowhere else to go. The detainee in question had a heart condition and had undergone triple bypass surgery. Do you accept that you said those words, hit with the edge anywhere between the knee and throat, and you just keep going?
That again, I think I said at the time, terminology was very poor, but it should have been make contact with the edge, and then the shield should then be between the knee, basically on the torso, is where it should be, which is between the knee and the bottom of the thorax. Excuse me.
You said the knee, and you're just for anyone who wasn't watching then, you're showing a chest there.
Yeah, I mean, as in once, because you would make contact with the edge of the shield, which is how the terminology should have been. And as you make contact, you sort of almost roll the shield on so that it's flat, and then you will, for weapons and arms, to help control.
You said the throat.
Sort of from there to there, that's actually what I meant, below throat. So knee, between knee.
Well, the throat's very different, Mr. Webb, than the chest,
sort of
isn't it?
There, isn't it? So it's there from there to there down, from the throat down. I would say that was where your throat end, or mine does, is about there.
You would have known from your training that hitting anybody or grabbing anyone or doing anything to the neck area was extremely dangerous, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's right, which is why it's between, as I said, between that area, not on that area, between that area.
So why did you include the throat in there and didn't say chest, if that's what you meant?
That's just the way I've said, as I said, at that particular point, that's how that is said is poorly put. There's no other way of putting it. It's not from the manual, is the honest answer.
And so why did you say it if it's not from the manual?
Now, obviously, having studied the manual, which obviously, as a use of force instructor, once you're doing, you get the opportunity to do that, I'd know that would be the correct terminology.
What about and just keep fucking going? What did you mean by that?
Well, I meant by that you keep pressure on, and then the arm officers would then come round and then take control of the arms. Every scenario obviously would be different.
What did you mean by hitting with the big gun?
I don't think I said that, which I said at the time again.
What about saying, yes, you don't stop until he's nowhere to go?
Generally, if you are doing a use of force in a cell, you would have the shield, and then you would, normally, if they were standing or sitting, they would be by a wall, by or whatever, and then you would hold them there for the arm officers to come round. So
when you say keep going until what?
Well, you keep the pressure till the arm officers have come round you and then kept hold of the arm. You wouldn't use it as a bat, if you like.
Do you accept that that could have been interpreted as being used as a bat?
As I said at the time, the terminology is poor. It's not from the manual.
You say on the last line there that it says DCO Webb has recognised that what he stated was unprofessional, and in relation to the allegation made by the BBC, accepted that he made comments which were unprofessional and inappropriate.
Yeah,
Do you maintain that?
I shouldn't have said hit with the edge of the shield, etc. Yeah, that's quite right.
And do you accept that by showing an inexperienced member of staff that this could have meant that, I'm talking about the, DCO Tully, that he would have then copied this behaviour?
He was as qualified as me at that point because he'd had the same training.
Well, Mr. Webb,
to be fair,
you'd been there since 2008. So almost 10 years by that point.
No, I didn't start with G4S until 2014.
My apologies, 2014. So you'd been there for 3 years by that point, which was longer than DCO Tully had been there.
He'd been there because he was an ACO originally first as well, wasn't he? So he'd been in the centre for a while, and then he transferred. So his ITC would have actually been after mine.
Well, he was asking you for advice.
Yeah, he constantly asked me for advice, as we've said before, and was fishing for information. Obviously, we understand that from the programme, to obviously further his career in that. And yes, I did answer him. That was wrong, which I stated at the time, and grammatically that is incorrect. It's not out of the manual.
I want to turn now to John Collier's reports in this respect. It's INQ 000111, paragraphs 32 to 33, and it's paragraphs 113 and 117 most concerned with. Mr. Collier, as you'll understand, has been instructed as an expert in use of force, and in particular has seen the footage, which unfortunately we haven't seen today, but we've looked at transcripts, and has also seen footage of the later incidents with D1914. So it's pages 32 to 33, please. And we'll see paragraph 113 there. Mr. Collier says the footage includes staff preparing for the intervention and Mr. Tully asking colleagues how the shield is used. Find the strange as he would have been taught this in his initial training course. The response was technically incorrect and seemed to imply that the bottom edge is deliberately used against the detainee. The correct application is for the shield to be held at approximately 45 degrees, but the bottom edge is not supposed to drive into areas stated between the knees and the throat. The flat of the shield should make contact in order to control the torso, whilst colleagues isolate and control the arms. This is taught by staff during use of force training in the planned intervention section of the syllabus. Do you accept what Mr. Collier says there?
Yeah, that's what I've just said. My grammar was poor. It shouldn't have been hit with the edge of the shield. It should have been contact with the shield between these and, or you're calling torso. I didn't.
So you're saying it's a matter of grammar that the mistake was that it was inappropriate?
The grammar was totally inappropriate, and yes, I shouldn't have risen to him, obviously goading. I don't believe I was the only one that he did do it to, but yes, it was wrong.
You say goading. He wasn't goading. He was asking a question about how to undertake use of force.
On the clip that you see on Panorama, but this obviously was... Cannon was always asking questions, continuously, and fishing for answers from people. And
So just let me understand what your evidence is. Which part of hit with the edge anywhere between the knee and throat, and you just keep fucking going, hit him with a big gun, yes, you don't stop until there's nowhere to go. Which part of that is you saying is wrong because it's grammatically incorrect?
no, it's not described as it is in the manual, but what I was saying is this, I agree with him, it should be at 45 degrees, you should contact with the flat of the shield. Obviously, if you're going to hold it at 45 degrees, it's going to have an edge, and then as you approach the detainee, they've not got any weapons, whatever, you would flat the shield. I know better now of how to describe it is what I'm trying to put across than I did at that point.
It's not a grammatical error then, it's you've described it incorrectly.
Yeah, terms, yeah, sorry, yes, the terms I've used are wrong from the not away from the manual.
It's not just a matter of terms though, is it? It's not some of the language you used, it's about what you're actually showing that Mr. Tully should be doing, which is pushing a shield until someone has nowhere to go, and you hit them with an edge, the edge of the shield. What about the language there is incorrect?
Well, you shouldn't hit with the edge. It's only you should, as he said, you hold it at 45 degrees, so obviously it will have a leading edge no matter what happens when you're standing still, because if you hold something at 45 degrees, it must have a leading edge. But when you approach the detainee, you lower that to be flat, so that when you do make contact, it is with the flat, not with the edge.
But the flat and the edge, that's not a mistaken language, is it? That's a very different thing. Would you agree?
Oh yes, that's what I'm saying. I've described it very poorly.
You explain in your witness statement that you actually thought that your training was good, and we heard earlier that you said that your ITC training on use of force was good. So was it the training that was wrong at the time, or was it your interpretation of the training that was wrong?
The way that I've spoken about it there, that is wrong. The training at the time, we were always told that you place a shield to isolate the arms for the other officers to come round.
So did you learn how to do this shield incident in the way you've described there? Was that in the training, or is this your interpretation of the training?
My interpretation of it with words.
So the training wasn't wrong?
No.
And you said that you since learned from your use of force instructor training that this was
That
wrong.
was, not correct.
I want to just take you to the fourth part of the transcript before we have a break. If we can put back on the screen, please, TRN 000087, paragraph, page 20. It's tab 11. Thank you. Line 696, we've got on the screen there. Callum Tully says, what if he dies? Just putting it into a bit of context perhaps from the top. I'm worried about it, I'm worried about the shield stuff, says Callum Tully. Obviously you say, it's just getting the first out of the way, innit? Callum Tully says, I'm just worried about this guy. You say, it doesn't matter. Callum says, what if he dies? You say, no, we've got that disclaimer. So what we'll do in the morning, I'll grab that off Nobby, I'll take a couple of copies before all the paperwork gets tucked away, and I'll give you one. Cool. So and then in that way, if anything happened later on, you say, yeah, says Callum Tully, you say, you've actually got a fucking copy of the doctor's letter. Callum says, sure, cool, and so on. That's describing an incident that we'll come on to in relation to D1914, isn't it? Later on that day, is that right?
Yeah, I don't remember that conversation, I have to be honest, but it's I know who that is about D1914.
And you described there a disclaimer, a medical disclaimer. Was it common practice to rely on a medical disclaimer before use of force incidents?
No, I think that's the first time that I dealt with anyone with any medical, like prior medical knowledge.
So that was the only time that you've seen a medical disclaimer on the file, as it were, before going into use of force
or told
incident?
that there was one.
Or told there was one.
Obviously, we would have been told in the briefing.
What did you mean by, if anything happens later on? Do you know?
I have no idea, because I don't remember that conversation at all. I'm going to be honest with you. So.
Let's put it in context. Callum Tully here seems to be said worried about the shield stuff. He says that at the top. And he says, what if he dies, to you? And he said, no, we've got a disclaimer. What do you think that disclaimer was about?
I don't know, because I don't know what he's referencing to be honest with you. I honestly don't remember that conversation at all. If we had a disclaimer, then we would have been told about it, as I say, by the briefing, which I'm assuming we must have, because obviously you've got it somewhere, but I don't remember that conversation at all.
Well,
I mean, I've not seen that before either.
You said you've actually got a fucking copy of the doctor's letter, so you knew that the disclaimer was a doctor's letter.
I would assume so. If that's a conversation that I had, I honestly don't know, because I've never seen that before. I don't remember the conversation.
And Callum Tully was worried about the person dying, so that's the context. What do you think that disclaimer would have disclaimed? What do you think the purpose of that would have been?
I would assume, if I'm going to get it, I've not seen it anyway, I would assume there would be someone saying that the use of force would be permitted for whatever reasons. I wouldn't know because I would say, at a guess, I am only guessing because I don't remember this conversation saying I've not seen this bit of paper before. That's what I'm referencing, is there must be something on there to say that obviously use of force has been approved.
And then you say, so then in that way, if everything happens later on, you don't know what you meant by that.
No, I would say to just keep all the paperwork together, because same as any of our use of force things we do, if you didn't write it down and didn't file it, then, you know, you couldn't rely on it later.
Did this then give you cover for what happened later on in that incident?
I don't. No, I don't. I'd say if we hadn't seen it, I don't know whether that's prior to us speaking to the doctors. I honestly can't remember that part of the conversation.
Thank you. We'll pause there, Chair. I think this is now an appropriate time to break for 15 minutes. Come back at 25 to.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's it. That's us covered.
Thank you.
Just take a seat. Thank you.
Ms Townsend.
Mr. Webb, we've spoken about the what happened before the incident with the shield. That is the use of force incidents against D-1914. I now want to move on to the incident itself. In fact, before I do, I've just been asked if you could make sure that you lean into the microphone so that the transcriber can hear everything you say. Thank you. In terms of that incident, that was an incident, just to refresh your memory, concerning D-1914, who was due to catch a flight to be transferred for a flight to Romania the following day, and he'd been relocated onto E-Wing in order for that to happen. There'd been a letter signed by a medical professional, Dr. Uzarali, which confirms that he was fit to fly, fit for detention, and happy for reasonable force to be used in order to facilitate the removal. Does that now jog your memory in terms of what that letter was about and that conversation was about?
We knew that he was obviously, yeah, I'd say that's, sorry to have it. Yeah, we knew that he was obviously fit to use, I'm trying to think of a better way to put it. The doctor had signed to say that he was fit enough for use of force if needed to be. That was part of the briefing before.
So when you said before you couldn't remember that conversation, do you mean you do now know that there was a doctor's letter that said
I don't
was
remember
fit
the
to-
once I remember that the doctor did that there was part of the briefing to say that the doctor was obviously fit for him to which would have been after that conversation, because obviously you would have had the briefing prior to the use of force.
Yes, and so therefore you would have, when you were talking about a disclaimer, you must have known about this letter.
I'm assuming so, yeah. Yeah, but I wouldn't have known what was in it, but obviously I'm assuming that's what it is, and then we would have been informed about that as part of the briefing after the conversation about the shield.
So your memory's now been jogged as to that conversation that you've had.
To the incident, yeah, and obviously the fact that there was a letter, that would have been part of the briefing, but I don't remember specifically the conversation with Callum prior to that.
Fine, but you accept that you did talk about it beforehand?
We were told about it at the briefing, yes.
But that you had this conversation with Callum Tully about the doctor's letter?
I don't remember what was said, but presumably if that's recorded, then it is. I've not seen it before.
Okay, and you accept that that's what you said. So then in that way, if anything happens later on, you've got the letter?
Yeah, well, yeah, we must have had some sort of, yeah, from the doctor, yeah. Otherwise, I'm assuming they wouldn't have allowed the use of force to go on if he wasn't obviously fit, so he must have had a fitness for that.
But do you accept that you said that about if anything happens later on?
I don't remember saying it, but very possibly.
So you've been reminded about what that letter was about, been reminded about the use of force incident itself. Please could I play a clip, disc 50, UOF 134.17, cam 3. This is a clip of the incident itself. Thank you.
Lights, Dixie, lights.
Come in, please. Come in, please. No, you'll be come back in a minute. Just come with me.
Just get healthcare in here. Healthcare? Okay, just assist him up off the bed. Sit up. Healthcare, can you just check him out, please? Because he's holding his chest. Okay, so healthcare are going to check you out, okay? Run up to the top, get me an email there. the first floor.
I'm trying to turn off. All right, mate, this job. It's our job, no? Just relax. Just relax.
Just pause there just for a moment, please. Can you tell which of the officers you are there?
I'm the one, as you're looking at the screen, on the left.
On the left.
Yes.
Thank you.
I know how to fly in my country. I have my belt next week. I have my family here.
Just relax a minute.
I have 3 heart attacks. I have my form of operation.
Just let healthcare do the odds and then we can continue.
Listen, dude, there's no flying tonight.
No, I know how to fly for nothing.
There's no flying tonight. You just need to walk in.
No, I know walking. I want to stay here, my please. I know how to stay. I will die here. Look, big operation.
I don't think.
3 heart attacks, not joking. And I have problem with my leg as well.
You're not going anywhere tonight. Just...
Why was...
You want to hold on, please? Let us...
What do you did?
To make sure you're okay. It's just to make sure you're alright. That's all we're doing. How long was the poster?
68.
That's fine. Do you know there's a smaller saturation in the back?
Sorry?
The smaller
Blood
one?
pressure's good. Considering he's got very comprehensive.
Because the SARS,
Pressure's good.
smaller SARS.
There's the oxygen one also as well.
It'll be a lot easier if you want to do. That's all that's happening to you. Whatever happens, we're going through that. That's 100%. I want you to walk. Let's do 5 liters, yeah? Nothing's happening to me. Can you come with the oxygen, please? Yeah, not tomorrow. Wait. Different. Pick it up.
No, sir, I want to stay
No,
here.
take it to the Fix up to 94. That's fine.
Yeah.
Happy?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Mr. You're going to go to E-Wing.
No, I know how to go.
So if you're not going to go to E-Wing, these officers will assist you, okay?
Yeah.
So, are you going to stand up and walk compliantly, yes or no?
No, I know how
Okay,
to stay.
just go through into locks. Okay, if he's resistant. Don't let him lie down, as best as you can.
Get up. Stand up.
Leave
Get up. Get you.
Why? What's the criminal? I'm not criminal. Why you do this? No, I'm not criminal. me hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I die, you are
Bring
responsible.
them forward.
You are responsible.
Okay, so Mr. As you're becoming a dead weight and you're resisting the officers, if you're not going to stand up and walk, what's potentially going to happen is your handcuffs will be applied and potentially you will be
Why to go,
lifted
sir?
in handcuffs.
Why to go
to
there?
doing.
Why to go? Because I don't want to fly my
Yes,
country.
because you're refusing to facilitate your removal directions.
Yeah, yeah.
So, stand up and walk compliantly now. Okay? Stand up to your feet, okay, with these officers and walk compliantly. Yes? If not, handcuffs will be applied and you will be carried. Yeah, which is going to hurt, which no one wants. We just want you to walk down there, and if your flight gets stopped, your flight gets stopped. Which is what we said all
Why
day.
will I have your flight get stopped? You know, my flight is not get stopped.
No, if it gets stopped. If your solicitor stops your flight, like we said to
I have to call my wife now, please.
No, you can call your wife when we're down there. So the quicker we get down there, the quicker you can call your wife and your solicitor.
Not bring me for this because I don't have I don't hire.
Okay, well stand up and walk. Stand up and walk.
No, 1 second, please. 1
No,
second.
they will assist you. Stand up.
I have to take my cigarette. 1 second.
Yeah, we will do that. We will do that.
As well. It doesn't work like that. Stand up, please.
I need my cigarettes.
Yes, we will do that. Come on, 1, 2, 3. Good man.
well done. Stand up.
Stand up.
Right, if you want to, you do what the cuffing will have to lift in.
Okay, so last chance to stand up and walk. If not, the officers will place you into handcuffs and you will be lifted. Okay?
Why you do this, sir? Why you do this for me?
I'm not discussing it with you.
300 attack I
So
have.
stand. Are you going to stand
No,
up
my
and
paper.
walk?
I have my paper there. Why you take my paper?
Are you going to stand up and walk with these officers now?
Why to walk?
Okay. Just put his hands behind his back.
No, I don't want to go.
One at a time.
No.
Release your hands so that officers can place handcuffs on you. If need be, we'll go on to the front if need be. That's it. Hold him there, don't move, because we've got a lot.
Finish, I go. I died, please. I died. Yeah. Please, I died. Please, I died. Yeah. Okay, I'm good. Please, I'm good. Go finish. So, yeah.
Yeah, that one's alright.
Sorry. So, I died. Yeah. Okay, I go. Wow, please.
Okay, so sit up. Okay. Right, okay, so you're going to stand up and walk.
It's not possible to.
Well, it is. So the officers are going to assist you.
I'm not possible to.
If we put you in a chair, are you going to sit compliantly in the chair? You need to talk to me because otherwise the decision will be taken out of your hands. Okay? Feeling alright? All good? Yeah. Okay. So what I suggested, we give him one more chance to assist him to his feet. So obviously not on the locks, under the arms. Okay? And if he doesn't and drops his weight again, then obviously we've got no chance to carry him. So the officers are going to help you onto the beds, okay, and then we're going to stand up, okay?
Let me please.
Officer, so stand up with them. That's it. That's it. Okay, so let's stand up and we're going to walk. As soon as you become compliant, we'll take the handcuffs off and you can sit in the chair. There
Right, you're not getting moving because you're in cuffs.
you go. Quickly.
Let's go, we're going. Dixie. Dixie.
No, let's just stand. Guys, let's just stand him up. He's had a chance to walk compliantly.
No, we'll bring him in. It's going to go for Dixie. It's not going to chair. It's not slamming his feet on top.
It's a bit hard.
Come on, stay going.
I'm not feeling good. I'm not good.
Okay, well,
That's right, healthcare here.
healthcare here, so the quicker we get going, the quicker we can release you.
We hear from D1914 himself through a witness statement that he's provided to the inquiry. He describes himself as howling in pain, struggling to breathe, and telling officers multiple times that he had heart problems. Were you concerned about the level of force that was used, given what you saw in terms of his medical presentation?
We had healthcare check him when we went in the room because we were concerned, as you can see. And
Just pause there. You said because you were concerned.
Well, when we went, he was laying down, obviously, wasn't he? So we just, because we'd had a prior knowledge of him having a medical issue, obviously everybody called for healthcare because he did seem to be laying down. They checked him over and said he was obviously fit to carry on, and then we moved on. And obviously the best option would have been for him to get up and walk, but as you saw yourself, he didn't. He dropped his weight down, and then, so obviously we used force to get him back up onto his feet and to move him.
You said you had concerns at the beginning as to his health, and that's why healthcare came in. Did you continue to have concerns about his health during the incident? Were you worried when he said, I've had 3 heart attacks? And he said, please, I die, and was breathing heavily? He was
The breathing heavily, I might not necessarily hear you'll hear him breathing, but not hear him because you've got a helmet on. The concern was obviously when we were in the room, as you saw, he was laying down, so we got help to check him to make sure that we were okay to carry on, and if we used force. They obviously agreed and said it was, and we did use force to get him back up onto his feet, and then I believe, going from memory after that, we just walked him in locks, guiding holds, because obviously he's in handcuffs to support him, rather than it is a restraint, but it's the lowest form of restraint. It's just more to steady him than it is anything else.
But were you worried during the incident when you heard him shout and say, please, I die, and so on? I presume you heard those words.
Oh yeah,
that wasn't blocked by your helmet.
I wasn't concerned. He was moving. He was fighting us. He was, and as I say, healthcare said we were okay to carry on. So medical. If they say it's okay, it's okay. If not,
Just
we
to
stop.
Pause there. 2 things. Say he was fighting. What do you mean by that?
Well, he was resisting. Sorry, perhaps resisting is a better word to use than fighting. He was resisting, and then obviously, as you saw, he dropped his weight to the floor. And then our concern is obviously to get him back at least to a sitting position, which is more comfortable for him. But we don't obviously want him to go prone on the floor.
I want to just bring up John Collier's report, because Mr. Collier's looked at this incident as well. It's INQ 000111, page 34, paragraph 124. Last paragraph there. My opinion and the reason for this incident being of high concern is that D1914 did not offer a level of threat to staff that justified their actions. If a full assessment had taken place prior to the intervention, I would not have expected to see full PPE. The force used was not necessary, and more time should have been taken to try and persuade compliance and the instruction to move. I'm even more concerned at the lack of consideration for the condition of D1914, who appeared unwell and unlikely to present a safety risk towards staff. Firstly, was full PPE necessary in your opinion?
Because obviously, with planned interventions. You never know. Obviously, he had another roommate in there as well. I don't know who that was, obviously.
Just pause there. Is it right that usually if there's a roommate, they would be taken out first?
Yes, that's right.
So when you went in, it was just him in the cell?
No, there was two. There was one other person that was removed first. That's why there were so many officers when we first went in. I think there were 6, because obviously for a CNR it's 3 officers per individual. So I think you find there should have been 6 going, and the other guy obviously got up and walked out compliantly. That's fine, and then we deal with the other thing. But you don't know what the situation is, do you? He because it's obviously we're going into him. He doesn't. We know he didn't want to comply with his RDs.
When you say you didn't know what the situation was, you knew that there was a doctor's letter. There'd been such concern about his condition that there was a doctor's letter about his fitness to be detained, to fly, to be used force on. So you knew there was a medical problem with him. And you knew that he'd had several heart attacks.
No, I didn't know he'd had several heart attacks. They didn't.
What did you know about him in terms of his health then?
We know he'd had. Again, I'm only going from memory. I wouldn't be able to remember word for word what was said at the briefing, but I remember that they said he had a issue with his heart, but the doctor had obviously, presumably, had said that was okay. Again, I wouldn't be able to remember that word for word. It's too long ago from the briefing.
So would full PPE be necessary for somebody who had a problem with their heart?
For planned, it would be normal to have PPE anyway, and the decision ultimately would have been made by the DCM or whoever up the chain.
And that was DCM Dix on that day?
On that particular case, where he got the authorisation from for the removal, obviously that was way above my pay grade, whether that came from immigration or I don't know, but we would obviously be led. And you said initially by what he had said. If he had said to us that we are going to be doing a removal, but there was no need for PPE, or you needed a certain part of PPE, then we would have gone with that. But if we've turned up in full PPE, it's because the staff have been asked to put on PPE.
Were all planned incidents? Did you always have full PPE for planned incidents?
Generally, yes, is the honest answer. We would be told to ask and go and get our kit and meet wherever for a briefing.
When you first went in the room, did you think that D1914 posed a threat?
No, which is why we didn't. I don't think the shield was used to make contact with him. Nobody, grabbed hold of him. We'll see how he was. Excuse me. And then obviously we called healthcare in. And we assisted him up because healthcare wanted to do his blood pressure and other stuff. I don't really know what they were doing, to be honest.
You said that he didn't pose a threat. Did you think that, therefore, your actions were not justified, having seen them again?
Well, at that point, I would agree we didn't necessarily need to be kitted up, and had he got up and walked out, we wouldn't have to, be anywhere near him, is the honest answer. But obviously he was refusing to move. What had gone on prior to that, I wouldn't have known either. I would assume, it's only an assumption, that he would have been spoken to earlier in the day by whoever gave him his RDs or DCMs.
We saw that.
And then they would assess that.
We saw that clip was just under 12 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there could have been more use of verbal de-escalation techniques before force was used? We tried to assist him up. He was asked several times, and it wasn't until we actually tried to pick him up that obviously you saw him drop his weight, and I believe he moved his arm, one of his arms, I didn't catch it that quickly, one of his arms out, which is why we then put him into lots. But he was offered in. Was moving his arm considered to be a threat at that time, do you think?
I can't remember the incident. I don't know how much force he was putting behind it. What he was, we just restrained the arms for obviously our safety as well, because if he starts flailing them around, he can just as well do an injury to us as he can to himself.
But you were all in full PPE. There were 3 officers in the room.
Yeah.
You thought that him moving his arm was a threat?
No, when he dropped his weight and he started pushing his arms out, I'm only going by that. I remember the incident by watching it, obviously. How much resistance it was, it's hard to tell because I'm not back in that room and I can't remember.
You said that there was a need for him to go. I assume you mean a need for him to be on the flight.
Yeah, that I should imagine. Whatever his removal directions are, that again would not obviously come from me or Dave, that would come from Home Office or whoever.
And that flight was the following day.
I believe so, yeah.
So was it necessary at that point to get him up to go to E-Wing?
Again, that decision would have been made above my pay grade.
Was there pressure to remove detainees, even where detained persons had health problems, do you think?
I think, as I said, I honestly think that's the only one that I've come across before that has had a health problem, where we've had to seek doctor's advice or anything like that at all.
I want to move on now to a second incident which involved D149. Not long after that, a few days later, on the 31st of May. I'm just going to refresh your memory by relying on Mr. Collier's summary of what happened. No need to bring it up. Essentially, D149 was being moved to CSU following an incident where he took hold of DCO Tully's keys.
Oh, right.
Do you remember that?
I don't remember that it was
The reason
DCO
why.
Tully's keys or,
Yes.
or whatever, but yeah.
And so the DCM tried to get him to walk to the CSU. He refused, and eventually there was a planned full intervention in full PPE. Staff tried to encourage him to go. It proved extremely difficult because D149 kept dropping his weight, attempting to kick, knee and trip staff. Handcuffs were applied, and eventually he was relocated. Meanwhile, he was verbally abusive to staff. If we can have up, please, this part of Mr. Collier's report. It's the same document we were just looking at, INQ 000111, pages 26 to 27. It's paragraphs 86 to 89. Following page, 86 to 89. Thank you. Paragraph 88 there, Mr. Collier said the prolonged restraint in the prone position is identified in the medical DVD and practical training of being high risk. The time spent in this occasion in this prone position was extended as staff were incompetent in their execution of the relocation technique. Would you agree with that?
Having reviewed the footage, obviously on the day hard to tell because you're, it did seem to take longer than perhaps it should be, and obviously lessons had been learnt from that, and the practice has been changed since.
How has the practice changed since?
There used to be the only option was pretty much a full relocation, which is what you saw on the video there. When I went for my training course, they just adopted what they call a side relocation. So therefore, the detainee, when on the floor, for want of a better description, was more in the recovery position. So therefore, not laying on his chest and obviously running any risks of other problems. And that obviously changed within the centre reasonably quickly after that. That incident that came in a couple of months. I'm guessing I would say it was like a couple of months after that came in, where obviously everybody had to be trained in it. So there was that sort of lag period where everybody was trained in the newer technique on the refreshers and whatever. But obviously, if you had 3 officers that had that training, then the side relocation would have been the preferred method as opposed to a full relocation.
And he also says, the previous paragraph 87, that staff seemed unsure how to execute a safe exit, and that there was a figure of 4 leg restraint where the officer is positioned incorrectly and tries to compensate by forcibly pulling the detainee's legs. This meant that there was a twist in the feet which caused pain to D149. Do you agree that that was also an issue?
It didn't. I mean, I'm going to go by footage, and obviously, it didn't look correct the way that it was being applied, or not the way we'd been trained, or the way I'd been trained. I can't, like for a full relocation.
Sorry, just so I understand your evidence correctly, you just said before that since then there'd been not other training into the relocation technique.
Yeah, there'd been a change in the actual use of force manual.
Yes.
And they changed it post that incident.
Yes. But you've just said now that this incident, you just talking, which we were just talking about, which was the safe exit, the way in which the exit.
Yeah, it was
done,
the
exiting
legs.
the cell.
It was the legs that was an issue, and that wasn't initially, in my opinion. Bear in mind, then I wasn't the user of force instructor. In my opinion, that then wasn't how I'd been shown how to do it. He had his body in just sort of slightly the wrong position, so it made it difficult to do.
So was that you? So you didn't do that technique in line with your training?
I didn't do I mean, I was, whoever it was.
I'm sorry. Whoever
Whoever the detainee
yes,
was, I can't remember I know the detainee was obviously there, and it was one of the I can't remember which DCO it is, so I wouldn't like to name someone incorrectly.
Sure.
But whoever that was, I believe they were in the wrong position to execute it properly.
Paragraph 89 is about the pain-inducing techniques. And what's said there is that a verbal instruction wasn't given about the pain-inducing technique having been administered. Should it have been? Do you agree that it should have been?
Yeah, there is. It actually states in obviously I haven't read the manual a lot more since then. It does actually state in there that a clear instruction should be given, so that therefore the detainee, actually says prisoner because obviously the it's a prison-led thing, knows what your aim are. Otherwise,
Just to give them a chance.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Otherwise, you're not.
Yes.
You're inflicting pain for no reason.
And who's responsible for giving that command?
Should be the number 1 officer, which is the head officer.
And who was on that day? Do you know?
Callum Tully.
Do you have anything else to say about the incident, having looked at the footage and the report?
No, I think there were good lessons learned from that, is my honest opinion, from the relocation side, because we did step away from the full relocation because it has got obviously medical implications. Holding the prone, and obviously the side relocation is a much better practice.
And you said it's got medical implications. What are those?
Restraint. Excuse me. Sorry. Restraint asphyxia. Obviously, if they're held there for a prolonged period of time, which obviously should be being monitored by the number 1 anyway. But obviously, that's taken away with the later version because obviously they are not laying in a prone position. They are sort of more in a, say, if you want a better way to put it, recovery position.
I want to take you to some conversations that you had after this incident. TRN 000088, page 20, it's tab 13, Chair.
Thank you.
You'll see at the top of the page the date, the 1st of June. So that was the day after that use of force incident, 31st of May. Callum Tully says, "You managed to get any digs in?" You say, "Huh?" He says, "You managed to get any digs in?" You say, "I fucking hurt." Inaudible. Says Tully. You say, "I fucking hurt, big time. When I put him in a straight hold, in the office downstairs, heard screaming. Ha ha." You put my weight behind. Tully. "If you go around threatening people, mate, what do you expect?" You. "It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. If you're going to be a fucking dick, it's going to hurt, innit?"
I don't remember having a conversation with him saying that. There's, yes, it would hurt, I would assume. And yes, he was screaming, which I think I actually put in my report. I can't remember because I haven't seen that since, obviously. But yeah.
Do you accept that you said those words?
I don't remember saying them. I don't even remember having the conversation with him. As I say, it's over 4 years ago. And I don't see why I would say...
We have the footage. Should we play the footage then, if you can't remember?
I haven't seen any footage, and I'd say this is the first time I've seen this.
Let's play the footage then.
Okay.
It's Kenkov 1028. B2 017 0601 0017.
Did you manage to get any digs in? Manage to get any digs in? Hey?
When I was putting a strain arm off on the two, and they heard it in the office downstairs. They screamed. Got a straight arm and brought my weight behind it. Fucking 3 months ago.
You go around threatening people, mate, what do you expect?
It's nothing personal, it's professional, isn't it?
Yeah.
Nothing personal, but if you're going to be a fucking dick, it's going to work, isn't it? Hi, Dave.
Do you accept that that was you who says those words?
Yeah, I can hear Mike like this, yeah.
At the end says, hi, Dave.
Oh, yeah, someone on the inside was there. Yeah, there was obviously other people in the office as well, but... Yeah.
But those words attributed to you that we've read out are the words that you've said, and that shows from that clip.
Yeah.
What were you talking about when you said I fucking hurt him?
I didn't think I say I hurt him. I think I said it would have hurt his arm, and in honesty, I should imagine it would have hurt his arm. Because I've been in the scenario change side of that when obviously you are in cuffs and you are lifted and whatever, and yes, it does hurt. There's
And
no
you said,
getting away from that.
he said they heard him in the office screaming. What made you say that?
But as soon as we did, I think if you watch the video of the actual incident, you see as soon as we, not just I, but as soon as we put hands on him, he does start screaming, and he's screaming throughout, all the way through the entire incident.
When you say at the end, but if you're going to be a fucking dick, it's going to hurt, isn't it? Doesn't that suggest that you intended it to hurt?
No, I don't intend it to hurt. It is going to hurt, as I've just said to you. It is going to hurt. I've done the same in scenario training, and it hurts. I can say that whatever.
Why do you say if you're going to be a fucking dick, it's going to hurt?
That, to be fair, and I will be honest, is something I would say. It's a word I would use about myself if I've done something stupid as well. It's not just me. That's something that I would use for this particular detainee, away from a professional, you know, when I'm with the detainees, etc. If I'm out with my friends, I would say that about myself if I did something stupid, you know, and then it's what it is.
You said, when I'm in a professional environment, when I'm in front of the detainees, I assume by that you meant you wouldn't use language like that in front of detainees.
No, as I said earlier, I believe you do relax a little when you're with your colleagues, as I believe you do in any vocation.
Is being with your colleagues here not a professional environment?
What I'm saying, I mean, we're away from detainees. There's no detainees that can overhear us. It is, you know, we could be in a staff room, presumably in an office. We're not out in an open wing surrounded by detainees. It's no different than where I work now. We have customers come in. There is certain language that we would use between the people I work with that we wouldn't use with the customers who are around.
In the investigation report, could bring that up, please, when you investigated about these words that were used. CGS 005979, pages 5 and 6. Just at the bottom there. He was asked if he may have been excessive in the use of force, to which he said no, and that minimal force had been used despite non-compliance from D149, who'd been kicking out on staff. DCO Webb asked if he had spoken about the incident to anyone. He stated that he didn't recall specifically talking about the incident and the restraint, but it may have been said following the incident in what may be described as locker room talk. When asked what this meant, he stated that it may have been said, but not in front of detainees, that would have been wrong. Just continue on to the next page, please. DCO Webb was asked, did he say he had hurt the detainee's arm so severely that he screamed to the extent that he did? DCO Webb stated that he had not been a participant in such an act, and if he had, then surely the detainee would have made a complaint. You've mentioned this locker room talk a few times during your evidence, and you've said that it may have been said, but not in front of detainees, or this would have been wrong. That's consistent with your evidence today.
Yeah.
Can you explain why such talk would have been wrong if it was in front of detainees?
It's not. It's not that. Excuse me. As I say, it's the same with every vocation in life. It's where I work with now. We have conversations, and especially as you can imagine, I work with lorry drivers and whatever else. Some of the language is very colourful. Doesn't mean that it's anything personal to anyone in particular or anything like that. But you wouldn't use that sort of language in front of a customer. And at the end of the day, to a degree, the detainees were our customers or our charges, and you just wouldn't use that language in front of them.
Why was it different between officers talking about detainees like that?
But you're away from your, if you want, I'm trying to think of the way to put it, from your professional side, where you are acting on behalf of G4S and looking after the detainees, and then you, excuse me, you have your, same as you have a dinner break or a tea break or you have a whatever, and in that time you tend to relax a little bit more, and then you want to put it right away, drop your guard slightly with the people that are surrounding you. They're all in the same situation as you. There's just a general chat. It doesn't.
So you don't see there's anything wrong in talking about detainees like that, boasting about getting digs in and so on?
Well, I never said that I'd got any digs in. That was Callum fishing for answers, I think.
Well, you said I fucking hurt.
Yeah, I hurt, yeah. But then I may hurt as well. I may have hurt as well. But I didn't say I'd hurt him. I didn't say I'd made him scream, which is what the allegation was.
You don't accept that it's subtext that is what you were that's what you were saying. You're saying I fucking hurt big time when I put him in a straight hold in the office downstairs, heard screaming when I put him in a straight hold. Doesn't that suggest that it's about what you did to a detainee?
It was effectively, yes, generalisation, but it was. As soon as I put him, I think if you watch the video evidence again, you'll see, as soon as he's in a straight arm hold, that is when he starts screaming. I didn't say he screamed in pain, he just starts screaming, and he's shouting and screaming at us all the way through.
So you said you don't think there's anything wrong with talking about detainees like that in front of officers. Don't you think that this could have fostered a culture about detainees, about that they were less than detention centre officers?
No, I don't think, because when we went back to the wings, that detainee that you were, D149, and also D1914, when they went on to E-wing, then they would have been looked after by me because I was the E-wing officer. I wouldn't have gone into work to do just that use of force. Once I had taken my kit off and done whatever, I would have reverted back to my normal job, which would have been DCO on E-wing, and I'd have been looking after these people.
And that didn't cause you any problems?
But you have to try and keep the two separate. You're not, a CNR is a part of the job, whether we like it or not, or whether other people like it, it is part of the job. We knew that when we all took the job on. If I'm asked to do that, that is part of my duties. I agreed to do that as part of my job. But then when that's over, I also agreed to look after people in E-wing, or well, I was put on E-wing, but look after the people that are on E-wing. So that's what I will do.
You referred to customers a moment ago. Did you see detainees as customers?
No, they were people we were in. Find the right words. We were trying to look after. I was just using it as a generalisation. It's they are still there, that we're there to look after. We're providing the service via G4S, which is to look after them while they're being detained and their cases are going through. So whether that's helping them with legal, food, obviously different people have got different things, like vegetarians, whatever, that is all part and parcel of it. There's a role of a DCO.
So you didn't call them customers, but you saw them as customers?
No, we just treated them as people, because every one of them, to be fair, that came in with it, I learnt as much from them, in honesty, while I was at Brookhouse, as they did about me. I know a lot more about some of their cultures now than I ever knew before, because we communicated with them. We called them by their name. Quite happy for them to call me by. They called me by my name.
You referred a second ago about tried to use an analogy of where you work at the moment and you have customers there. Is it the same as working in a detention centre? Working as an engineer for a company?
No, it's a different job. But what I'm saying is the people that you work with, you will have a different rapport with than you would with the customers.
Do you understand that there's a very different position that detained persons are in a detention centre?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
As opposed to somebody who is a customer in your
absolutely. Yes,
business you're working at the moment.
And that's what I'm saying. But that's what I'm saying. There's two separate parts to the job. There was the use of force part, which was what we'd all signed up for, as accepting the job. But then there was also the looking after them, the aftercare side, if you want, because even if they had use of force, they'd come to E-wing. That was my wing, and if that's where I was working, I went back, and if they needed anything, if they needed any more healthcare, if whatever their needs were, they would be met. If they had any dietary needs, that would be met. I
want to ask you about disciplinary proceedings immediately following Panorama.
Mm-hmm.
So you were given a precautionary suspension from duty.
Yep.
Once Panorama had aired, and you received a verbal warning which stayed on your record for 6 months. And you received a letter from the Home Office Certification team manager,
Yep.
Which said that you would not be recommended that your DCO certificate should be revoked. So essentially you stayed at Brookhouse.
Yes.
Just for the purpose of time, I won't bring this up on screen, but there was an email from the Home Office, a Claire Checksfield, to Jerry Petherwick from G4S, who was concerned about the fact that you had not gone to any more training since those remarks and since you'd been investigated. She says, just some additional loose ends from me. What professional standards training conversations were held with Dave Webb after the disciplinary investigation and reinstatement? How could he have walked away with the idea that he had been reinstated for his report writing skills? The other thing that just leaps out of me is that irrespective of the deeply unprofessional behaviour, we ended up with such a mismatch of the specification of safety training for hibiscus and healthcare staff. Could you add a review of this and work to refresh the action plan, please? The reply then was, turning to Dave Webb specifically, I regret my research into his retraining has come to a very unsatisfactory conclusion. It does not seem that it was related only to his reaccreditation as a CNR instructor, as it was believed that training would inculcate the necessary insights and standards. In my opinion, this was flawed from the outset, as it turned out. As a result of the past week, we are now revising the selection and reaccreditation of trainers, and we're moving to the videoing of training sessions. I realise the stable door approach, can only apologise. I'm as frustrated as you will be. So did you receive any other training once you returned to work after Panorama?
Only the course that I went on to get internet, was it? But no.
To what, sorry?
Only the use of force course.
Instructor training, that was in August?
Yes.
Yes, and you resumed your role in November?
Yes, but no, between that, no.
And in terms of the issue with the shield that we were talking earlier about, were you able to have any more insight after you come back from the period you had off?
No, I think I'm going from memory, which is not. I think my refreshers normally came up around about the beginning of the year, so it would have been sort of
January.
January, February.
So you had no refresher training or retraining, and you continued your role as a use of force instructor after November?
After November, yeah.
You weren't spoken to about your return and anything that was concerning given your suspension?
No.
No more additional monitoring or oversight of you that you know of?
Not that I know of, no.
Want to lead then finally to the disciplinary proceedings resulting in your dismissal. You say at paragraph 9, your first statement, that in the months leading up and including the relevant period, I left G4S in 2018 following a training dispute.
Yeah.
That's not correct, is it?
It is, because I dispute what they said, but that's why I've written it, right?
Do you still dispute the substantiated findings?
But yeah, because that wasn't the whole thing. As far as I'm concerned, it is my opinion. It wasn't thoroughly gone through. I believe I put in my statement that I already knew that morning before I'd left pretty much that it was a foregone conclusion. And it, yeah, without leading on to too much more, that's personal stuff that's, I'm not happy with G4S, but...
Let me just bring this up on the screen if I can. It's HOM 001120, page 5, which I think will be another 10 minutes or so, if that's okay.
That's fine. I'm sure your preference, Mr. Webb, will be to stay a little late so that we don't have to ask you to come back.
Yes,
My apologies. Thank you.
We'll just go through these very briefly. Essentially, what was said was that you were a use and force instructor during an introductory course training, which is, as we've discussed, the ITC training that everybody had, becoming a DCO. Is that right?
Yeah.
And this was a particular event on the 28th of February 2018.
But this was not an ITC. This was a personal protection course.
Right. Apologies.
Which is why I've said, if you had read the thing, they actually got it completely wrong, because they've put it down as an ITC. They've got the wrong venue. They're saying it's at Tinsley House. It was at Brookhouse. There were many things that were wrong with it, which is why I lost quite a bit of faith in how much time they've actually put into it.
That aside, the purpose of you being there that day was to instruct staff on use of force?
No, personal protection.
Personal protection
Yeah.
techniques?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And you were doing this with a colleague, Jason Riggs?
Yep.
Is that right? And there were hibiscus people from the organisation Hibiscus that were there.
Yes.
And it was people from there that made staff from Hibiscus that made a complaint.
Yes.
Could you explain briefly what Hibiscus is?
I don't know too much. It's the first time I come across them, to be fair, but I believe they replaced, because we used to have Bernardo's for the family suites, and then when they shut one of the centres down and moved it to Tinsley House, I think Hibiscus took over as in the role of what was Bernardo's.
And Tinsley House had families there?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, they're different. Yeah.
Why it was different to Brookhouse?
Yes, yeah.
Fine. And so there would have been children there as well?
Yes, so they, to be fair, would most probably, they would never have worked at Brookhouse, and they most probably wouldn't have really worked within Tinsley House. They would have worked within the family suites, I would guess, because they were more children orientated, which is a bit strange while they were on a personal protection course, to be honest with you, bearing in mind that they would normally deal with children and families.
Yeah, and your training to then, the first allegation, which was proven, is you saying, I'm going to fucking destroy you.
I said, I'm going to destroy you. This was part of a scenario-based training, where we are obviously, it's personal protection. This is not people that, we're trying to portray that if it's someone that's, they're obviously wanting to do you some harm. So in scenario training, yes, if I'm paying the perpetrator, I would use language and try and make the scenario as realistic, using emotive words, because that's what it was. And then that would obviously then lead us on to some of the other topics that we go through during the day, obviously fight and flight, adrenaline, etc., etc.
The GFROS found this substantiated, that you used this this kind of language. Do you accept that it's not acceptable language now?
But I think in scenario training, if you want to make it as realistic, you're not going to just use P's and Q's all the time. It is what it was. It was a scenario. It was not my feelings towards these people I'd never met before. It was to try and, suppose, I'm trying to think of the words to put it. It's supposed to be emotive, and it's supposed to raise that this is what it is like if you come across a violent person, or can be.
So you accept that you did say it, but you're saying
Yeah.
it's out of context?
Yeah. Yes.
What about the next allegation? It's allegation 4, if we can roll down. Dave and Jason said that the punches taught in the syllabus are never used because they don't do anything. They said they were just punched in the face. Do you agree saying that?
I never said that. What we would say is that when you make a strike, whether it be a punch or a, we obviously through the day taught other things, knee strikes, etc., that might not necessarily work on an individual, because it might not necessarily. If myself, if I come across somebody who's been boxing for 40 years and I try and punch him in the stomach, he's most probably just going to laugh at me. So you may have to put in another strike or try something else, but I wouldn't have said punch in the face.
So you don't agree that you said that?
No.
So G4S investigation's wrong here, is it?
Yeah.
What about their conclusion that whilst it's entirely appropriate for trainers to reinforce with learners on the course that they are able to do what they feel is reasonable and necessary, if approved methods from the manual are dismissed or minimised by trainers, it does not give a clear message about force needing to be reasonable or proportionate. If force is not used in this way, our legitimacy to those in our care will be significantly reduced. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, but during what they haven't mentioned in any of this, or weren't interested in the interview that I went to, was any of the other evidence that we produced. The fact that we'd spent 4 hours in the morning going through the reasonable, proportionate, necessary, no more than necessary, all of those things, the DMP side of it, to make sure that they'd made the correct decision. If they had made the wrong decision, make sure that it was put in a report. That was the most important thing. Don't, if you've done something and it wasn't a correct technique, then you still have to put that in your report. There is obviously provision on that, and the Immigration Act 2000, the reasonable force side of it. Sometimes doing the wrong thing may be the right thing by that person at the time, because obviously everybody is going to react differently, which was why we were trying to push them on the day, because nobody knows what's going to happen when their body's hit with adrenaline.
I want to move on to allegation 8, which is on page 6 to 7. It says, you referring to prisoners and prison. Do you agree that you would refer to prisoners and prisons?
Prisoners and prisons, yes. But, as we said to these people at the beginning of the course, and we said at the beginning of all of our courses, because I had our manual was prison-based, it did say prisons. And we did say to them at the beginning of every course, when it comes up on the slideshows, we read it as it is on the board, but where it comes up as prisoners, you have to accept that as detainees, because it is a prison-led course, but obviously we are a detention centre.
So did you say detainees, not prisoners, or did you use the word
I said
prisoners?
detainees. Jason more often would most probably say prisoners, but he was from a prison, and so would, oh God, I've forgotten the other guy's name now. Sorry, I'm really terrible with names. That did some courses with me as well. He was a prison officer as well, so he would refer to them as prisoners.
Now, you agree that IRCs are not a place for punishment, are they? They're not prisons.
No.
And you understand that there's a difference between force used in a custodial environment and in a detention centre, or is there?
The techniques are the same, but yes, there is a difference, because obviously we were not And as I say, unfortunately, when you read some of the slides, if you look in the use of force management, and even when you look at the photographs and the videos that we played during the courses, because it was a prison-led, predominantly course, when they're doing the medical, all of the officers are in prison uniforms. All the photographs are of people in prison uniforms. It's because it's a prison-led course, but we did explain that to them at the beginning of the course.
Did you think that was a problem, that it kept?
It was, and I was changing it,
prisons
and I was changing my presentation slowly and changing the words and then redoing it and putting it into detainees instead of prisoners.
What do you mean slowly? Do you mean on your feet at the time, or do you mean after you'd given the presentation many on different
Well, no,
occasions?
because I was going through the whole manual, and it wasn't something I specifically had to do because we were, you know, it's the manual is what it is. I was trying to make it more IRC friendly, if you like, by changing it myself and doing that work myself, so that when I come and did a slideshow, it would say detainees, not prisoners.
Allegation 9 is that you, which is on page 6, you said that you had great reporting skills, and that was the reason why you were allowed back to work after Panorama, and you got a cruise out of it.
Yeah.
Do you agree that you said that?
I think it's quite safe to say that we can all agree that my report writing and my grammar isn't the best in the world. So I wouldn't agree with that. And did I go on a cruise? No, absolutely not. I spent all of my time suspended contacting the HR there every Friday on my landline and when they wanted to contact me. So I didn't go anywhere.
Allegation 13, which is at page 8, is that you told the people you were training, who are also going to be using force in a family environment, staff should respond to detainees with "fuck off" aggressively and swearing if detainees touch officers in a friendly manner. Do you agree you said that?
No.
Do you agree that
This was when we were talking about attacks from the rear, I believe, and the message we was getting across is if someone was performing an attack from the rear, obviously from the rear you're not going to see it, goes without saying, if someone grabbed you and that was your natural reaction because of the adrenaline, endorphins, everything else running through your body, that was what you put in your report. If your reaction was to turn around and stand there in a high guard, that was what you put on your report. So it was a matter about trying to get some transparency.
Is this another case where G4S have taken out of context?
They've taken, and this is what they've done. They've taken, in my opinion, to bear in mind, it's my opinion because I just
I'm
lost
asking
faith
you.
in it.
I'm asking you your opinion.
It is my opinion. They've taken very small parts. One of them in particular that stands out, which is on the slideshow, and they say that it says on the slideshow that it, I can't remember it word for word. You'll have to excuse me. Something like speak to the detainee in a soft and gentle voice and tell them to calm down. And I told them that was right. What I said was I agreed with the low and calm voice, but in my opinion, from my experience, telling somebody to calm down isn't necessarily the right thing. That would have been followed with, which is what I did on every course I did, it might be better to ask them, is there anything I can do for you at the moment to help you? Can you speak a bit slower because I'm having issues, you know?
We can turn to that allegation, allegation 16, page 8. Sorry, next page, just at the top there. What it says is that in the presentations slideshow, there was a line about how to de-escalate a situation by using a soft, calm, soft voice. And Dave said that we could endure that it doesn't work.
Yeah. No, but if you read that whole line...
Just let me finish the question. It didn't go on to say, but I said, no, that's not a good idea. In fact, you should ask them how they are and is there anything we can do for them, is it?
No, but it also doesn't say in there that the question, the words that I was questioning, which is to tell the detainee to calm down.
So is this another allegation taken out of context?
Yeah. And there was more to it, but they just shortened it to the bit they wanted to hear.
And finally, the last allegation, allegation 15, which is just above that, that you alluded to DCO's lives being worth more than detained persons with reference to the Human Rights Act, and you gave a hypothetical example about smashing a fax machine over a detained person's head if you were attacked by a detained person. Did you say that?
This was a hypothetical example when we was asking about reasonable proportionate force. And what the actual thing was if a detainee had another detainee on the floor, by the throat, trying to kill them, and you couldn't physically remove them. It was a question we just asked them as I put it out there. And you couldn't physically remove them, but you're only one there. I used the example of a fax machine because every wing had one. I said, if you hit them with the fax machine, would you be wrong to save a life by doing that to get the person off? I then followed it with another question. Now they ask you the same question. If you picked up that fax machine and continued hitting them with it, would it then be reasonable force and proportionate and necessary? So it was just literally two hypothetical examples of, was this necessary, what your feelings on that, to try and get some response from them. So that, to try and get that every action that they take, there's got to be a reasonable, proportionate and necessary reason behind it.
So that was taken out of context as well?
Yes.
There are 16 substantiated allegations that are all similar here.
Yeah, and there's...
You're saying all of them have been taken out of context?
In my opinion, there's three interviews that were taken out of, I think it was about 8. 2 were contradictory to this, that I've read, and the other ones they didn't take. That's my opinion.
Would you agree that that language and the attitudes that you showed there are particularly egregious, given the fact that you were a use of force instructor?
In scenarios, as I say, we use language, I agree with that. When it comes to the use of reasonable force, again, we have to try and do that. And talking in a low, soft voice, my opinion still is today, if somebody is up here, you know, because of whatever reason, asking them to calm down isn't always the best course of action. So we try to pass on some of our scenarios that we've been involved with where it seems to work better.
On that allegation 15, it says that Dave alluded to our lives being worth more than detainee's life.
No.
Is that what you thought?
No. And I definitely, I never said that.
And does this also demonstrate that other DCOs also believed that too? You're saying in the presence of the DCOs?
No.
Training of the DCOs?
No.
Finally, I want to ask you about your reflections on Panorama. What do you think now that you've seen it?
Now that I've seen it, I think it's very cleverly edited, and Callum's obviously done a very good job of forging his career forward. I think there is a lot more to it. You did only see the worst, if you like, of Brookhouse. He managed to bring that down into quite small, emotive bits of filming, etc. But what he didn't do is show all the good work that some of the staff do, which was a shame that it wasn't a more balanced. I'm not saying it was perfect, or you know, but there was a lot of staff did some very good work as well, and unfortunately none of that was shown.
Do you include yourself in that? Lots of good work.
I think most of the DCOs I know, that would have to be made up decided by the people that I work with. I wouldn't, but I've seen some people calm people down really well when they've been up in the air. We've had people come in with sort of medical issues, and you know, people have really helped them and done as much as they can. So there's been some good work as well, but it's just a shame it wasn't as nicely balanced.
So you suggest that Callum Tully was doing this for his career. You said earlier this afternoon that we understood that from the programme to obviously further his career in that. When you're referring to we, who do you mean we?
Well, just generally people that have watched it. It's a lot of it, and some of I've read a couple of other statements, but not many, because unfortunately I can't get a chance to because of my work. And there's obviously other people with the same opinion.
Who are those other people?
Oh, I've just scanned through loads to try and pick out paragraphs, to be honest with you. Not anyone in particular.
Is it Jan Pascali?
I haven't spoken to Jan. Well, I hadn't spoken to Jan since before the programme because I got suspended and haven't seen him since.
What about Derek Murphy?
No, neither.
You've spoken to either of
I haven't
those?
seen any of the DCOs since I left in March.
You haven't seen them. Have you
No,
spoken or
haven't spoken
communicated
to
in
them.
any way?
No, none at all.
You also said that
The
Callum
only
was
one
fishing.
the only one who I have obviously spoken to, because I don't really have a lot of choice, is my brother-in-law. But that's that's what
And
it
that's
is. Nathan
Dave
Ward.
Nathan Ward, I'm sorry, yes. DCO Murphy and Jan Pascali, DCO Pascali, both use the same word you mentioned earlier, that fishing for stories. That's what Callum Solly was doing.
Yeah, he always has. I think yeah, not necessarily just to do with use of force. Just generally, it was like questions. Whether I picked it up from, I may have picked it up from one of their statements. I don't know. I've literally just scanned through. I've not really looked at names. I've been trying in a very short period of time to see roughly what's going on. But it's only what I've read or.
So you haven't both all spoken to each other about this? And
No, I haven't spoken to any. The only person I've spoken to that works for Brookhouse since I left Brookhouse, well, actually, with my brother-in-law. But then that's, that's what it is, isn't it? I can't really avoid him.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. I don't have any more questions, but if you wait there, the chair may have some more.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions, Mr. Webb. So you have described your experience working on E-Wing quite differently to how some other former staff have described their experiences of E-Wing. You've also told us that you worked certain shift patterns that meant that you weren't ordinarily on shift with some of those staff. Do you think, is it reasonable to say that there could be such a difference between an environment between one shift to another?
I suppose there could be people. Obviously, we are all different, and even I suppose that's the only thing I could say really. I mean, we're all individuals, aren't we? We all work differently. I say mainly worked, to be honest with you, with Andy Jennings, who is similar age to me. He's a ex-forces chap. We just got on very well, and we just got on with the job. So I was quite lucky with who I worked with, I think, personally.
So do you think the staff working on a wing can have an impact on how that wing feels?
I would say so, especially more in some of the other wings, I would say, definitely, because of obviously the numbers. We were lucky in E-Wing. We were quite close. I've just remembered the name of the other lady I worked with. That's really bad, isn't it?
Tell us now if you remember it.
Ange O'Connor.
Okay, thank you.
Angela O'Connor. And they were the two main people that I worked with. And we all got on, all of similar age, all got on very well, all just got on with the job. And didn't socialise, as I said before, whatever. But I dare say that that could change if you had different schematics of different people from different backgrounds. It would affect it.
Do you think that might mean that it felt quite different for the detained people being held on that wing as well? Do you think there might have been a different atmosphere depending on who the staff were?
I would say so, to be fair, yeah. As in everything in walk of life, isn't it? How you get on or don't get on with people affects your opinion, doesn't it?
Okay, thank you. The other, I just want to take you back to something that you said earlier on in your evidence, just to double check that I've understood you correctly. Miss Townsend asked you about how you would find out about the health status, specifically the mental health status of somebody on E-Wing. And I think I'm correct that you said that you might find that out by being informed from reception, somebody on reception, or from healthcare. Yeah. So have I understood you right, that you on occasions would find out that you had somebody who had a certain, you might not understand what the diagnosis was, but you might understand that somebody had a mental health problem on E-Wing at that time? Yes,
yeah, because generally, as I say, when I don't know the full induction process as in a detainee coming into the centre, because I never ever worked reception, but I do know that they had a healthcare assessment there, and if they picked up on anything at that point, they would normally if it was an issue of any form, put them into E-wing, especially for the first couple of days, because obviously it was easier for them to monitor them as well, because E-wing was obviously a closed wing, and they weren't let out in the centre as much. If they wanted to get to them to do observations or whatever, it was a bit more simplified for them, basically.
So how would you get that information? Can you remember exactly what? Would you get a phone call? Did it come through to you?
They
on
would
a
normally,
report? How did you-
if again, as they came down from reception, they would obviously be escorted down from reception, normally by reception staff. And if it was anything of concern, it would vary. Sometimes the healthcare would call from reception and say, we've got this gentleman coming down, or whatever. Sometimes they would come with him, I suppose, depending on workload and whatever else is going on in the centre.
Okay, and how did you then record that? Did you record that information?
It would have been
On E-wing?
recorded on their when they came from reception. They obviously filled out all their paperwork with their SID number and everything else on it, and there'd be sometimes a short section on it if it was something that we needed to know about, or whether it would normally be on there.
Okay, so I'm sorry to keep. I just wanted
That's
to
right, it's
check
fine.
that I
No, no, it's
understand this
fine.
properly. But so, if you were to come onto your shift and you've got a new detained person that's come onto E-wing, but they arrived before you came onto your shift, that person has come down with a mental health diagnosis. That information has been passed on to the person that was on the previous shift. How do you find out?
We always had an overlap on
Right.
the change of shift. So if you like, the wing office, obviously where all the records were kept and whatever, there would be a sort of a 10-15 minute briefing, sometimes longer, for the day shift to the night shift and the night shift to the day shift, just to let them know that was going on.
Is that verbal
Yeah.
briefing?
Yeah, and if it was like ACDTs and things like that, it would be written down in the diary as well. We had a wing diary, so you'd make a note of it in the wing diary, so that
Okay.
you know, obviously something like that you don't want to miss. So if it was just missed on a verbal thing, it'd be written down as well.
So if you came onto the beginning of a shift, you would expect to be told, Mr. X in that room,
That's
Mr.
Certainly the way we work, or the way I worked and generally work with the people on E-wing.
Okay.
And as I say, there would be a note in the diary as well, and obviously on their ACDT, etc.
Okay. Did that always work as well as you'd like it to in practice?
I don't think we ever had any problems with it at all. If I'm honest, none that I can remember of.
Okay.
That was 4 years ago.
Thank you. They're all my questions, Mr. Webb. Thank you. I know it's been a long afternoon and we've kept you slightly late. I'm grateful for your
It's what it
evidence.
is.
Thank you very much. Ms. Townsend, we're finished for the day, I believe.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
We will return at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you.